Welcome to the Vintage Iron Project. Let's go.
Welcome to the Vintage Iron Project. I'm Rick Doughty, and I'm here today with Hugh Parker and his amazing collection of bikes and history. So Hugh, welcome.
Thank you.
How does a guy like yourself go from tech to motocross? You were involved with Zoom and a bunch of other places up there in Silicon Valley, right?
Yep, absolutely. Well, it's a very long history in that I, long before technology, was a fan of motocross as a small kid. And I grew up in Northern California, started riding just for fun, and then wanted to start to get into racing. From that, happened to be at the mecca of Fox and Campbell, just lived right there actually at the time, and started going. My dad took me to the races, and started out on an 80, and then from there kind of progressed into motocross and started to build a kind of a cool history of the love of bikes, but also the love of racing and motocross in general. And then started hanging out with Dean Matson and Rick Ryan up in Northern California. Dean was just a little bit younger than me. Rick was already racing pro, but so I started out on 80s, did the whole Southern California circuit, Golden State Series, Trans-Cal, and that's kind of, I met Dean Matson at the World Mini in 83 at Saddleback. And then we both traveled up back north together and kind of never really separated, and started just doing lots and lots of motocross together. Got introduced to Rick Ryan. And so those were kind of guys that I really admired and followed at the time. But then obviously when you're doing the Golden States and Trans-Cals, you get to see a lot of the factory stuff. And so at my era was, Jeff Ward, Rick Johnson, Bailey, O'Mara, Barnett, and all those guys. So we'd race amateur and then get to watch all the pros, which was obviously really cool, and really just loved dirt bikes at that point in my life, and really started to try and make a career for myself at it, and so that's kind of how I got started in motocross.
Everybody thinks that Southern California was the absolute mecca, but Northern California has a pretty rich motocross history.
Absolutely. I mean, Brad Lackey, Brandis, Rick Ryan, Dean Matson, Schultz, Daryl Schultz, Magoo. So there's a lot of guys that were Northern California guys. Totally different riding style up there than here. Every time I went to Saddleback, I didn't know how to ride Blue Groove, and so it was frustrating for me because I, would ride in loam all the time or rain, and we do a lot of trail riding. And I more recently was listening to Michael Brandis talk about single track and hills and riding on really tight stuff with trees. And so I think I learned the same things about riding motocross and riding bikes in that environment. So every time I came to Southern California, I'd fit at Saddleback or some of these places. Indian Dunes was super more my style, or things like that. But Carlsbad and Saddleback were those are tough. Just having that Blue Groove was always a thorn for riding.
So how did what you learned in motocross transfer into business?
Great question. It's a lot. I think that motocross is brutal. It teaches you tenacity. Things happen so quickly. Your mind just, in motocross is just something that, things happen in a split second, but also there's grit, there's determination, there's all these things that translate into the real world later, right? So for me, it's like after motocross, it's like, okay, the mind just thinks in a certain way, right? I think all motocrossers would agree that there's a certain type of person, like, if I meet a fellow guy that used to ride dirt bikes, you kind of already know what that person's kind of mentality is going to be. It translated well in that, it's just determination, I think, and grit, and realizing that times aren't always rosy. And so, when you have a bad day or a bad moto, and you got to load up early and leave, it's the same thing at work. When you got something that goes wrong and you got to fix a problem, or you got something to solve, that part of it, I think, translates, right?
So you carry that through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's why you honor these bikes and everything it's given you. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the bikes you have. I think you got the Wardy's 86.
Yep.
SR.
Yep, SR 250. He had won the championship in 85, so he ran the number one plate on that bike in 86. And I don't remember exactly how I finished up. I know Rick Johnson won in 86 on the Honda. Still a cool piece of history because it was the number one bike.
And you're a bit of a Jeff Ward fan.
Yeah, I love Jeff Ward. Yeah, a big fan too. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about his 84 bike.
Yeah, so the 84 bike was super special just because I watched him that series, and I watched him race against Johnny on the HRC 125, and lots and lots of memories of being at both Golden States, Transcals, and National at 84 National at Saddleback, watching him win on that bike.
And that's an actual full works.
That's a full works bike, 120 that's made for Jeff. Yeah. Interesting piece of information is that I took this photograph with my mother's camera in 1984 at Hollister Hills, and little did I know that, however many 30 plus 5, 37, 8, 40 years, whatever it was later, 40 years, that I would actually own a bike. So that was pretty cool for me. Being a
Shot that with a Brownie camera?
I shot that with my mother's camera, and got Ward's jersey from Washougal right here.
As a bench, Joel.
Nice and dirty.
He didn't ride that hard. The pits aren't willing.
Anyway, just some cool memorabilia. But that bike was special to me because I wasn't riding 250s at the time, and I was a 125 guy, and so I thought this would be, amazing. Just got me into the bikes, and I was enamored with the works bikes in general.
Yeah.
So they were just, I guess, they're pieces of art, right? And it was cool to see those guys ride something that, I guess, those bikes made a statement in that if you got to ride that bike, then you obviously made it in the industry, right? So it was a very cool thing to say you got to ride a works bike.
And those bikes were valued at over $100,000 a bike back then.
Absolutely, yeah. I think David's or any of the 250s and Supercross Art Room Nationals were $250,000 to produce at that time, and 80s money. So you can only imagine what that would translate to today. Right?
Yeah.
So
Tons of dough. How about Rick Johnson?
Yeah.
Bike?
So RJ, the bad boy. Well, as with all these bikes, these were all bikes that I got to see live, back in the day, and actually watch them race. So that they're extra special to me. And then I got to see them in that fashion. Being from Northern California, and growing up close to Fox, and then seeing Pete bring RJ on board and doing that custom gear for RJ and the boots and everything else, and seeing him go out and even though this year was Sinisalo, that was his last year, but the year after in the 86 HRC 250 that I had, having all that custom gear was really cool.
And this is the actual bike, not a replica.
Yeah, this is the actual 250 that won the title.
Yeah, billet forks.
Yeah,
all the cool.
And the cool thing about this bike is Rick Johnson beat these $250,000 custom HR machines, that the factory had spent a ton of money on, and this is a production bike with Olin suspension. And for him to go out there and beat those bikes, a lot of them, you had Bailey, you had O'Mara, you had these guys riding these bikes, and for him to win on that, I think that's pretty special what that bike accomplished. Yeah.
But you know what else that bike accomplished? By Yamaha making him ride a production bike, basically, he went to Honda.
That's true.
So,
yeah.
He wasn't all that happy about it.
Right. There's a funny story behind that, which, I know you and I and Rick actually shared with us about going and talking to Honda before he was supposed to. But
oh, yeah, right. Test riding the Honda.
When
he's still under contract.
Yeah. Out at Palm Avenue, I think.
He was the bad boy.
Yeah, he was the bad boy.
Makes sense. What about the...
Jeff Chicken Matiasevich. So probably the trickiest 250 two-stroke ever created, handmade in Japan for him. He won 3 titles at this point, so 95, 96, and 97. So he three-peated the All Japan Nationals. This bike there's so many works parts on this thing, it's just unbelievable. Funny story is that Chicken and I started racing together in the novice class. We raced for years together. So in the last season that I raced with Chicken before he became a pro was in the 85 season of Golden State and Transcal. And he was riding at Dave Miller Concepts 125. And I had just started using Pro Circuit pipes, I think back at the time in 85 and 86. And my only claim to fame is that in 1983 at the Cal Expo Supercross, I beat Chicken at the Supercross. Brock Lever was wearing pink gear that night and won the main event. But yeah, I beat Chicken one time.
Did he parquet after that?
No.
I think he had a little bit of a rep for that.
Yeah.
And how about the big boy?
The big boy, super special bike, probably not as popular in the United States, but Georges Jobe's Works 500. My thing is all things works, and it's just a special machine. And to know that the guy won 5 world titles is great. And he used to hand sign the tank, and for him to pass away that he did, but have the legacy of the bike, and also David Dewhurst putting such a great book together, and then having the bike profile in the book was really special.
3 of your bikes.
Yeah, actually, there's 5. I think I have 5 bikes that were in David's book.
Yeah. So if people want to read more about that,
Absolutely, yeah.
see some stills of the bikes, then you've got a story there.
Yep.
Well, it's an amazing collection. I see what drives you to have stuff like this. I understand your love for Wardy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a gritty guy.
Yeah.
And he shouldn't go as fast as he.
Watching that bike sing in person, which it'd be one thing if I owned the bike and I never got to see him ride, but to see him ride that thing and watch him burn motors on that and listen to that bike, it was unreal. And I actually started the bike about a month ago after we got it ready to bring in and do some of this stuff. And I fired it up in my driveway, and to hear that thing sing again from 40 years ago, whatever it was, and pretty gnarly. I mean, it was just so crispy, and it just still sounds amazing.
It runs?
It runs, yeah. It's amazing.
What if we could get Wardy to ride it?
That would be really cool. That would be really
that treasure and let him ride it?
Of course, it's his bike. I'm just a custodian right now, but to see him on that bike would be really special. That would be pretty cool.
Well, there you have it on film. We're going to see if we can get Jeff Ward to ride his old bike again. That'd be pretty darn special.
That would be.
Well, we want to thank you for tuning in for the first episode of the Vintage Iron Project. And thank you, Hugh, for coming down and making such a great effort.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.